In Chapter 1, Ulfilas and King Jael travel through the northern wilderness with a column of warriors, heading toward a desolate crater known as the Starstone Crater. They encounter the Jotun, a giant clan, and Jael presents a tribute to their warlord, Ildair, in exchange for assistance. Ildair initially threatens Jael, but ultimately agrees to help after inspecting the weapons Jael offers. Jael reveals his true purpose. He wants Ildair's help in finding a runaway boy. Ulfilas, though wary of Jael's leadership and the dangers ahead, continues to follow him in the uncertain journey. In Chapter 2, Corban wakes from a disturbing dream to find his camp under attack by the Kadoshim, powerful, inhuman creatures. A fierce battle ensues, with Corban fighting alongside his allies, including Balur, Storm, and Tukul's Jahar warriors. During the skirmish, Corban is nearly killed by a Kadoshim, but Storm and Gar intervene, saving him. After the battle, Corban mourns his mother's death, buried in a cairn. As the group prepares to move on, Corban is approached by Michal, who informs him that the Kadoshim are regrouping in Murius. Tukul and others turn to Corban, recognizing him as their leader, the Seren Disglair. In Chapter 3, Uthas surveys the aftermath of battle at Murius, where most of the Benothi are dead, and a few survivors tattoo themselves to mark their kills. He feels guilt and fear, particularly over Balur's survival. Calidus and Alcyon discuss the state of their forces, while Uthas contemplates his role as the new king of the Benothi. Calidus reveals plans to transport the cauldron to Tenebril with Uthas' help. Uthas is tasked with keeping watch over Nathair, who is conflicted about his role. Calidus attempts to persuade Nathair to join their cause, arguing that Asroth's return could create a new order. In Chapter 4, Makeen flees through the forest with Fidele, the Queen Regent, who had been forced into marriage with Lycos, lord of the Vinthalan. After a brief rest by a stream, Makeen reflects on his past, remembering his fallen comrades and his desire to avenge their deaths. Fidele, grateful for his protection, reveals the magic that bound her to Lycos. Despite Makeen's intention to head home and seek vengeance on Jael, he agrees to help Fidele survive. Later, while scavenging for supplies, Makeen captures a Vinthalan soldier, who offers information about Lycos' secret involving a giantess and her child. In Chapter 5, Camlin, injured from a battle, is tended to by Baird while Adana, Vaughn, and others are nearby. Despite his pain, Camlin reflects on their dangerous situation and the people who have fallen, including his friend Marok. As the ship sails away from Domhain, Adana plans a confrontation with Roshin. She wants clarity on Roshin's intentions regarding Aramon's last wishes to protect her and her son, Lorcan. Roshin offers a new alliance, agreeing to help Adana reclaim her throne in exchange for safety. The chapter ends with Lorcan entering, unaware of the deal made between the women. In Chapter 6, Rafe retrieves a body from the sea, recognizing the work of Camlin, who had been shooting Connell's men with arrows. Rafe reflects on his journey, far from home, and his connection to Connell, who is now leading a group of warriors. Connell faces tension with Queen Rin's men, but asserts his position as regent. Hallion, unconscious, is brought back to life, and Connell interrogates him about Adana and Lorcan's escape. Rafe reveals that Braith was killed by Camlin. As they prepare to return to Duntaris, Rafe discovers Braith's body washed ashore, alive but gravely wounded. In Chapter 7, Tukul reflects on the dead Kadoshim, particularly a young female warrior who had turned to Asroth's service. He shares a moment with his son Gar, who is mourning his mother's death. Tukul expresses pride in Gar's growth and wisdom. They discuss a strategy to leave a warning for their enemies by hanging the Kadoshim bodies in a nearby grove. Meanwhile, Corban, still grieving, is uncertain about their next move. He rejects Michal's advice to go to Drasil, instead deciding to follow his heart and fulfill an oath to Adana. The group agrees to ride south, with Corban gaining support from the giants. In Chapter 8, Cywin rides with Corban, reflecting on how much he has changed. She struggles with grief over their mother's death and her captivity, and they discuss their pasts. Corban shares his experiences, including his capture and rescue, and reveals that Michal is one of the Benelim, an angel of Elion. The Jahar call Corban the Seren Disglair, the bright star prophesied to defeat Asroth. They discuss the prophecy and the 7 treasures, including the Spear of Skald, which must be protected to thwart Asroth. Corban considers going to Drasil to secure it. In Chapter 9, Fidele and Makin travel through the forest with their prisoner Senios, a Vinthalan warrior. Senios reveals that Lycos is hiding giants and that they must find them. As they journey, Fidel struggles with her emotions, reflecting on her fear of Lycos and her desire to remain strong. After a tense night in the forest,